We all want to be happier, but how do we get there? First, we start by realizing happiness is not a destination. Being happy consists of micro action steps every single day. I'm your host, Brittany King, and I'm here to guide you along the way. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Positively Real podcast. I'm your host and coach, Brittany King, and I got a special treat for you today. Joining me on the podcast is Abby Medcalf, and she is a relationship maven, psychologist, author, podcast host, TEDx speaker who has helped thousands of people think differently so they can create connections with ease and joys in their relationships. And the most important relationship, the one with yourself. And I would say on this podcast, that is what I'm constantly talking about, is the relationship we have with ourselves. And what better way to learn about a relationship with yourself than all of the people that are in your life. So Abby, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I've been waiting.
I am so excited. Even before we hit record, we already had like a very good energy going. So I was like, we need to hit record because like a lot of times gold comes from before you hit record or after. So Abby, why don't you introduce yourself, a little background about what you do, why you do it, and then we're just going to dive right in.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in. I'm a New Yorker and I live in the Bay Area, and I'm a mom and a wife and everything, all the things. And I got into psychology. I'm a recovering heroin addict, and that's how I sort of got into the field. And as many in my day did, you'd be at a rehab and then be a counselor the next day. It was sort of like that back in the day. But anyway, and I did that for many years, and then I decided, so I have like a drug and alcohol specialty also, but I decided I wanted to have a wider impact. So I went into the business world, and then that's, everything always morphs into the next thing. And I was doing coaching with executives who had drug and alcohol problems. And then I was in my work with them, I was helping their marriages, and they kept coming in saying, wow, I'm, cause we were working just on them. I would never meet, it was all men pretty much, but I would never meet these wives. And yet they kept saying, wow, I'm getting along better with my kids. And, my wife and I are it's like it's brand new. We're in a honeymoon phase again. And I, after a while of hearing this from all these, I thought, what am I doing? Like, what's happening? And I think because I had a psychology counseling background, I didn't know the difference between coaching and counseling. So I was counseling, not, and coaching. I didn't really, and anyway, we were doing all this work on them, and that became, I started to really quantify what I was doing. I thought there's something, I'm a researcher, and, I started to really quantify what I was doing. And that became my first book, which is Be Happily Married, Even If Your Partner Won't Do a Thing, because that's where that was. That's an Amazon #1 bestseller, which has done very well. And, I realized like, wow. And that's what really led to my TED Talk, and, really understanding why relationships truly fail. And that morphed into the Relationships Made Easy podcast and trying to get the word out differently and all the things. So everything has really flowed in such a, I have a bachelor's in political science way back. And so it's flowed in an amazing way to like where it is now. But yeah, so I have this kind of unique background in business and in counseling, which sort of, I think, makes the information I present pretty different than most people.
Wow. That's an amazing story. Just even like being able to turn like something that was such a painful period of your life into something so positive, and then just following the breadcrumbs. It's interesting being, in this world and like noticing the patterns in the people that you help and like what their outcomes are. And you're like, oh, like there's something there's something. What are we like? We're not actually, not helping them with their relationships, but their relationships are getting better. So like, what is going on here? So it's amazing that you were able to follow, I call them breadcrumbs, when it's just kind of like these little like drops of like, well, just go explore that. Just go explore that. I love it. Relationships Made Easy podcast. So good. So I just want to dive right in. I want to know the real reasons why relationships fail.
Well, so I would ask people all the time, and people would come to me, couples and individuals, and they would tell me that their number one problem in the relationship, it's what I hear all the time. I was, what's the biggest problem in your relationship? And everybody says communication. Like everybody,
Mhm.
everybody, everybody. Sometimes they'll mention sex or money, but they go right to communication.
Mhm.
And that is not the biggest problem in your relationship. That is like a symptom of the
Mhm.
cancer,
Mm.
that you stop communicating. The cancer, the thing that's actually at your relationship is competition.
Mm.
And and as soon as I say this, usually people are, kind of looking at me, and and then as soon as I sort of define it, which I'm about to do, everyone gets it. Because
Mhm.
when you're in a relationship, and especially when you start having kids, but even before,
Mhm.
we start keeping score.
Mhm.
Well, I took Johnny to baseball on Tuesday, so you have to take Sophie to piano on Thursday, right? You
Mhm.
went out, and if you don't have kids, it doesn't matter. Oh, you went out with your friends on Friday, so I'm gonna go out with my friends on Saturday. Or you spent money on this, so now I'm gonna spend money on this. We we set each other up on opposite teams, and we compete
Mm.
for the resources in a relationship, which are money, time's the biggie. And so we start competing for the resources. And when you think of that, how on earth does competition in a relationship ever lead to love? It's
Mhm.
fear-based, right? If
Mhm.
you get more, I get less. It
Mhm.
is fear-based to keep track because I might get taken advantage of. I hear that a
Mhm.
lot. What if I get
Mhm.
taken advantage of? And
Mhm.
I can talk about that because you don't. Not when you shift the mindset into where it needs
Mhm.
to be. And that is true if you're even single listening today. Like if you're
Mhm.
single, it is what's in the way of all of your, work, anywhere. So anyone listening, this is the answer, is that you start to keep score and you start acting from fear instead of love, and I
Mm.
say fear versus love. It's really fear-based emotions. So, worry, anxiety, depression, frustration, resentment, keeping score feeling, the
Mhm.
competition versus love-based emotions, which are openness and willingness and compassion and kindness and thoughtfulness. And, when you do those, and really from a science perspective, this is what's so important. I think people get very into kind of the woo, and I'm a cynical New Yorker, so I don't. I love the woo, but it's
Mhm.
backed up by science. And so
Mhm.
we know that when the fear part of our brain is engaged, our amygdala, our limbic system, when that's engaged, we can see on a functional MRI, they can see, or a PET scan, they can see that the thinking part of your brain, this prefrontal lobe,
Mhm.
your prefrontal cortex, that this thinking part of your brain where your logic is, where all the great tools you learned, what did
Mhm.
Brittany teach me to do? Oh,
Mhm.
to remember that, all of that great planning, problem solving, that is all in that housed in that part of the brain. And when your fear brain is lit up, it looks literally on a PET scan like there's a blanket over that part of your brain. It's gray.
Mm.
Nothing is lit up. And
Mm.
what's important is that so when you're in fear, that's all you start seeing,
Mhm.
right? It starts sort of like,
Mhm. Like the spiral.
yeah, and I can talk about the science behind that too. And then it's like, oh, you're like proving yourself right. It becomes a self-fulfilling
Mhm.
prophecy. And we get very
Mhm.
stuck in that. And we think we're seeing the truth, and we're not. We're seeing a skewed reality.
Mhm.
And it's very hard to convince people. Again, that's why I use the science. When you can show them this is
Mhm.
what's happening,
Mhm.
and we can talk about that too, but let's back it up. And if you can be in this other part of your brain, here's the beauty: when your prefrontal cortex is, or your neocortex, when any of those are engaged, your limbic is not lit up, can't light up.
Mm.
It's a one-way street.
Mm.
So it's either or.
Mhm.
So it's why it matters, and it's really what you teach all the time. It's why it matters what you're thinking
Mhm.
all the time, not
Yeah.
some of the time, all the time. And it's
Mhm.
really like eating Haagen-Dazs all day long and then expecting a great body and to feel energized.
Mhm.
It's not gonna happen, with your thoughts. Your thoughts are feeding that all day long. So I do a lot of work on mindfulness, as you do, and
Mhm.
self-awareness, because you've got to shift that around.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, there are so many things that we're gonna
Yeah,
come
I know.
back to
That's
in
why I
that as
stopped.
a
I said, "Let me
but
shut up."
it makes so much sense because that is something that I share all the time. It's like when stress is high, like your logic is low. Like your intelligence, like you don't have access, it almost like cuts it off to see it like actually get to see that is so
Yep.
powerful because it really just shows what's actually happening because people feel it. Like I know
Yes.
when I'm super activated or stressed or like having a fear response, I'm not making sense. Like I'm trying to
No.
say things and especially in my relationship because I've
Mhm.
had multiple times where I've been really triggered by something seemingly so innocent and my reaction
Yes.
was so disproportionate and
Right.
I understand like I have a fear of abandonment and so like this behavior triggered that and so as I'm trying to explain it I couldn't
Yeah.
explain anything because that part of my brain so it's like to hear that it makes so
Yep.
much sense and I think that's the biggest thing like understanding the science behind it because
Yeah.
it's like that really does be like oh like my brain's
Oh,
not broken like it's just
it's
doing what
not.
it's supposed to be doing and I love like I love that it you said like the communication's a symptom of what's like going on
Yep.
underneath it that's how I mean so many things so many of our problems were like this is what the problem is like no it's
Yep.
that there's a root to it and
Yep.
that's something that I've noticed in my relationship especially since having kids
Mhm.
because it's like, oh, well, you went out like, and I can hear the conversation
Mhm.
and my husband is so great at being like, we're not counting shrimp. Like he will bring me
Yeah.
back down. But like I have such a fear approach to relationships because of my fear of abandonment. Like it's just such an interesting dynamic. But to hear it
Mhm.
like the way that you explained it, like it just makes so much
Yeah.
sense.
And when
Yeah.
you really get into that when you think about that, you go, "Oh, if I if I'm competing with my right? For anything
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship, like, "Oh, you had this time,
Mm-hmm.
away and I need this time," and you start comparing. First of all, you can't compare.
No,
Impossible.
it's
Because
impossible.
what we all do in the relationship have different values, right? It might not take the same amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hardest thing. Women tend to spend much more time in and we know this from the research, right? And we carry more emotional labor. I mean, we already know that. Like, we
Right.
know this.
We know the invisible load.
We know the invisible load. The issue is that there are a lot of things that men do that are because they're quicker and take less time, don't
Mhm,
get counted the same. Because
mhm.
you know, if my husband's mowing the lawn, it doesn't take as long as all the grocery shopping and cooking I do all week. So I'm
Right,
close.
right,
Like, and you do that every other week,
right,
for an hour or you know what I mean? And then,
right.
are you kidding? So when
Mhm,
we start comparing, we get in so much trouble.
mhm,
And here's the key is that, and what I talk about a lot is that, we say things to our partners like, you have to take this off my plate. You need to pull your weight. It needs to be fair. And what we're, you need to, yeah, it's like this idea that there's something they need to always be doing.
yeah,
And what we're missing is that it's the same plate.
right. Like we're all on the
It's
same
one
plate.
plate.
It's
It's
one
what they
plate.
can't take anything off your plate. It
Right,
is the same plate. So
right.
what you're doing, you're a shared battery. So when
Mhm,
we because what happens, I think, especially for either side, we think, well, I can't do this, and my partner needs to, right?
mhm,
Like, well, you need to do it because I don't have time. Not no, no, no. They're already burnt also. Like,
mhm,
they're already at their maximum also, and that's why things get forgotten and don't happen, and that's why stuff gets on the clean the garage has been on the list since last February, like,
mhm,
that's why things don't happen. We don't stop to go and I always say there's 2 things you need to do. One is you have to think, so if we're a shared battery, so if I give and it's the same plate, and if I give this to my partner, really I'm just taking away from myself because let's say him for me, when he's more drained, this isn't helping me
mhm,
to drain that part of our battery. It's still
mhm.
draining my battery. Because
Totally.
guess what? When I'm drained, am I patient? No. Do I
Right,
want to have sex? No. Do
right.
I am I playful? No. That
Mhm,
is draining my relationship
mhm,
without a doubt. So the answer is to either plus or minus. And the minus is what do you need to take off the plate? We have there's so much perfectionism and you have to do and da da da,
mhm,
and we had decided, my kid's dad and I early on, that there was a lot. My kids are not going to Harvard. They're off to college this year.
mhm,
They're not going to Harvard, and I'm okay with that. And
mhm,
they are happy and well adjusted and did not have a crazy we did not have one of those lifestyles where my kids were out at 10 o'clock at night on a school night. Like we had bedtimes. We were like very around it. We had one sport at a time. We
mhm,
had, one instrument at a time. We really talked about how we wanted it to feel in our home. And that is still very busy.
Mhm.
Just one sport and but people, oh, they're not gonna get into the right elementary school, and they're not getting into the right this, and they're not gonna do this. I mean, I talk to these people all the time. It's crazy the
Mhm.
amount of pressure and the amount of and then we're traveling every spring break and we didn't travel every no, we didn't. We did.
Mhm.
One of our favorite vacations was the Embassy Suites near our house. Because
Amazing.
kids don't care, little kids don't care. They don't
They
wanna
don't
be on a
care.
plane for 3 hours. They don't
Mm,
want a time change. They don't want any of that.
mm-mm,
So,
mm-mm.
they want a pool, pretty much
Mhm.
every kid I know. So, we'd go to the NBC Suites, they have an indoor pool. It was like a beautiful thing, and then if I forgot something at home, I would drive 15 minutes home and pick it up and bring it
Amazing.
back. I mean, I don't know what to say, like, for us, that was more important than taking them to India when they were 5. I just
Mhm.
for us and it's okay if you're doing that. I don't judge other people doing it. I just wanna offer that you don't have to.
Right.
It's okay. Your kids don't need the perfect Christmas experience with every relative and all the tradition. It's okay. You
Mhm.
can, you gotta do what's good for you, the culture of your family. So
Mhm.
taking things off the plate, deciding what doesn't have to be there, which also means adding resources from outside the couple.
Mhm.
We don't right? Outside the couple. So little Xavier down the street used to walk our dog and clean up the dog poop in the backyard because I just couldn't yell at the kids anymore about it.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm so done with me having one more thing on my plate because the dog poop is in the backyard and then they step in it and then it's in my house. And that like I say a lot, do you want to be correct or effective?
Mm.
So yeah, it's correct that they should do this. My kids
Mhm.
should have this chore maybe, but is it effective? Am I happy? Are they happy? Is
Mhm.
the dog poop getting picked up regularly? Am I
And is
not,
it like draining your resource to
there you go.
to actually
Yep.
be able to like if you're continuing to
Yes.
have the same conversation with them over
Yes.
and over again.
Right. But I could pay
Yeah.
Xavier $5 a week who loved our
Yeah.
dog,
Yeah.
like, and he loved doing it and having money. Like, great, great,
Right.
win, win, win as far as I'm concerned. Or
Totally.
bartering, hey, mom of a kid I barely know, could you drive the kids on Tuesday
Yeah.
and Thursday? I'll drive them Monday, Wednesday. And suddenly I have Tuesday, Thursday mornings. Like, if you have
Mhm.
money or don't, there's just ways to bring, but always think outside the couple.
Yeah.
I
I
find that
love
couples
that.
only look at each other. If I can't do it, you
Mhm.
have to do it. And
Yeah.
that is what starts to really drain.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's kind of how where we've been out in our relationship is like we and you just articulated so well. I haven't really been able to put words on like what makes our relationship so effective, but we do that. We use outsourced side resources because we know how important like our unit. I've never thought about us as a battery together and a plate
Yep.
together, but I do remember like the first time Brian went and did something after I had Ellie, just like in the height of friggin' postpartum, like figuring it out. I
Mhm.
was like, he went out for a run and a burger with his friend, and he came back, and I was like steaming. I was so you could like feel he was like
Oh, poor baby.
no, yeah. He was like, so do you want to talk about it? And like
Yeah.
in that conversation, I like remember it so vividly because it was like we're together. Like we're not taking from each other, like we're together. Like we just have to figure out what we need
Mhm.
together in order to like to thrive. And so hearing you
Yes.
say that, I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure people listening too can kind of like hear themselves in their relationships. Well, I did this and you did that. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
it's not supposed to be 50-50. And I've come to realize that more and more. Like how Brian takes care and supports the family is different than how I do.
Yes.
And on paper, it's like it's not like it's not fair in quotes at
Yep.
all if you're looking at it in that way. But when I think about it, like his capacity was like so limited after
There
a
you go.
travel and a race. And I was like, I'll do bedtime, I'll do this. Like
Right.
like I'm like, let me, like we have that conversation. And and I know like when my capacity is much smaller, like he'll come, like,
Yeah.
we're very much like our capacity
Good.
is like very important that we're checking in on that. And then what do we need outside of us? So hearing you say it
Right.
like that is really, I'm
Right.
like, wow, this is
And
all
not
makes
and not to
sense.
judge.
Right.
I find that females tend to have more emotional bandwidth for things
Mm-hmm.
than I tend. Obviously, there's men who have more than women sometimes, but what happens is it's a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and why isn't he doing it, or why isn't this happening,
Right.
or And I was like, because he's doing the best he can with what he's got, and
Right,
it's
with, like, where
different than
he's at.
yours. Doesn't
Totally.
mean you should pick up all the slack all the time. It
No.
means you have to problem solve together as a couple.
Yes.
So, right? Because again, shared battery. Or
Mhm.
one of my favorites, I just had this with a couple, she got a promotion, was out of town more for her work.
Mhm.
And he was at home with the kid, so now he's working still,
Mhm.
plus now he has kids full time, right? And doing all
Mhm.
that. And they did a couple little things, like there was a carpool one, like, but that was it.
Mhm.
And what happens, and this is often, she comes home from the trip and he's like, here's the kids, I'm out of here,
Mhm.
like, because
Mhm.
he's exhausted from
Right.
having added all this work. Well, she was not on vacation.
No.
And I was the one who used to travel, so I remember I was time changes and planes and
Totally.
being on point and doing all that. So, yeah, it was nice to get to my room and sleep and not get
Mhm.
woken up in the night, I'm not gonna lie, but I was still drained when I got home.
Right.
And so now I have 2 drained people, but there's this idea that, now you have to take over and, I've been here. And instead, again, I assigned all my couples, I'm like, add resources so that the
Mhm.
person who's home isn't having double the work.
Right.
So you have to add a lot that week, probably.
Mhm.
I don't know what it all is, but I used to like cook meals and have them ready in the freezer or whatever. And then he wouldn't make these healthy meals for my kids. He'd be like ordering in pizzas and I'd be furious. Like, oh my God, why did I go to all this trouble? It's like, don't go to the trouble.
Mhm.
Like, just have pizza still. It's okay for the week.
Right.
Your kids won't die from pizza, or whatever
Right.
that is for your family. Like,
Yeah.
you really have to problem solve that together. How can we approach this? It's not a you problem or a me problem. It's a
Mhm.
we, right?
Right.
Everything's a we, because anything
Yeah.
that affects you affects me. So, because again, that shared battery. So there's just this approach to the relationship where you're both on the same side, where you're not competing. Because
Mhm.
frankly, if we're on opposite teams, if I'm keeping score and you're on the other team, I don't want you to win.
Right.
It means I
Right.
lose. No, thank you. I'm going to
Right.
win. So that's when we get into, well, I did this, and that,
Mhm.
and we start doing that whole list. I've done it. And you realize, what are you doing? Like,
Totally.
who are you trying to convince? And we really end up even farther apart.
Right.
So really it is competition. And I would just want to throw in another piece of little brain chemistry here, which is so
Mhm.
important, is that we have part of our brain, which is our reticular activating system, with,
Mhm.
our RAS for short, is it has a lot to do with the inputs that come in our arousal state.
Mhm.
And one of the things it does is when you're thinking something consciously, it sends it to the subconscious to look for that thing.
Mhm.
So, for example, and you probably have it now when you're pregnant, you see pregnant people everywhere when you're pregnant.
Totally.
When you're pregnant, it's like there was a population explosion.
Mhm.
Right now, I can tell you, I can't remember the last time I saw a pregnant woman,
Mhm.
because it's right.
Totally. On one
Never
of our
want
trips to Telluride, I was like, "Is it just me, or is everybody in Telluride pregnant, or is it
everyone's
like
pregnant.
has it always been
What's
like this?"
going on?
Like there's children everywhere, there's pregnant people everywhere. I'm like, and when we would go when we were just a single couple, not thinking about a family,
Right.
never saw children, never
Never
saw
saw.
a child there.
No, there's no children in Aspen for Telluride. Right. I mean, and if you've ever thought of getting a new car, you see that
Hmm.
car everywhere,
Oh,
right?
totally.
That is your RAS,
Hmm.
because, your brain is very efficient. So it
Hmm.
doesn't wanna see 1,000 cars when you're thinking of buying a car. It wants to point out consciously what you're
Yeah.
thinking about,
Yeah. What's
and it
important?
brings it to your attention. Well, the problem is, if you think, "My husband's always nagging me,"
Right. Then it's all you're
or,
gonna
"He
see.
he never says I appreciate you. He doesn't appreciate me. My husband doesn't appreciate me." That's the one I hear probably the most. "He doesn't appreciate me." Your RAS sends that as an order, an instruction to your subconscious, to look for my
Hmm.
husband not appreciating me,
Right.
to look for my wife nagging me,
Mhm.
to
Collect
look
more
for this thing.
evidence. It's like
It
it needs
wants
to
more
confirm
evidence.
it. Yeah.
And that's what happens. And here's the really scary part. So that's all you're going to see, because
Right.
it's like the white
And it
Volvos. If you're looking for white Volvos or
right.
whatever,
And
that's
it's
all you're going to see.
happening unconsciously, so you're not
Right.
aware of it. You're just like, "This is my
This is
reality,"
the
but
truth.
it's not. It's a
It's not.
very skewed.
Exactly,
Yeah.
negatively. And
Mhm.
at the same time, like, that's not bad enough, right? At the
Mhm.
same time, your RAS, again, because your brain is so efficient, it will filter out anything that doesn't match what you
Right.
think.
Right.
So when your husband is appreciative, and I literally had this last week, I had a couple I was working with, and she said this, "You're not," and he said, I said thank you last night for dinner. I do every night. I came in after work and said thanks so much for what I forget. There was a thing she had done for the house, a plumber she had called. He said what like I and she literally was like, I don't remember that.
Mhm.
Or you didn't,
Like,
yeah, that was a little
filters right
you know
out.
what I mean?
Yeah.
She kind of remembered it, but she completely discounted it. It didn't count. And of course,
Mhm.
then the partner, the man or the woman on the other side is saying, "Oh my God, why even try?"
Mhm. And they
She
shut
says she
down.
wants more appreciation. I say
Mhm.
thank you. I tell her how beautiful she is. I can't tell you how many people I have come in and talk to me like this. And then I try and nothing works. So why bother?
Right.
And then there is more evidence now that it
Right.
doesn't.
It just
So
further creates
yes.
more evidence.
Yes.
So when a couple comes to you like that, right? So like same play. I like to use the analogy like same book, just different pages, right? And they're we're at the same dinner and had totally different
Yes.
experiences. So, I know you mentioned like the thing to do is like add resources that are not
Mhm.
within the couple. So what else? Like what would you suggest to someone? So you're like you can kind of see it because you're that third party,
Mhm.
non-judgmental, just observing it. How would you guide someone that is having that experience and is maybe having this miscommunication, like cycling over and over again? So, for example, it happens and then they're fine because they go to
Yeah.
therapy, they work on it. And then a month later, something else happens. And then the same conversation is still happening and nothing has quite been resolved.
Right. That happens a lot
Yeah.
because you're not when we're not getting what we need, we focus
Mm-hmm.
on what we want.
Mm-hmm.
So
Makes
really think about
sense.
it. So when you're not getting what you
Mhm.
need, you focus on what you want.
And I've
So
learned that
oh,
desire, wants are
mhm.
directly tied to anger and frustration
And resentment,
and resentment.
my favorite,
Yeah.
right? That's
Totally.
really the thing people have. There's
Uh-huh.
this huge
It's
resentment, right?
yeah.
So this is about boundaries, but we'll do that later.
Yeah.
But think about this. So if you made a list of everything, what I did, I made I'm a manifestor, right? I made a list of everything I wanted in my marriage. I made a nice list of that. Nowhere on the list did it say anything about the toilet seat or the whiskers in the sink,
Mhm.
you know, the little sludge
Mhm.
there. Nowhere did it say anything about how he parked his car or when he should bring in the garbage cans. And that's the stuff we bitch and moan about.
Mhm.
But what is on that list? For me, I call them deal breakers, like your thing that you
Mhm.
must have, that I wanna know that we're a team,
Mhm.
that no matter what, Gary has my back. Like, in front of people. So for me, that shows up as, he used to tease me a lot when we were first together, like he would and for me, that's nope. Do not
Mhm.
tease me in front of other people, especially.
Mhm.
Like, you're my teammate. Don't tease me. No, men love that. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know. But
Yeah.
anyway, women tend to not. And I have
Mhm.
older brothers. I had a lot of PTSD. I was like, nope, nope.
Yeah.
If you want to have sex, if you ever want to get a blowjob again, you will not tease me again. Like, those are your choices. You can keep teasing me, but blowjobs don't go with it. So I find that that's very
Your
motivating.
choice.
That's very motivating for people.
Very
'Cause they'll
effective.
tell you like, well, I like it. It's my love language. I'm like, that's cool.
It's fine.
It just here's what happens on the other side. And then I gotta tell you, Gary hasn't teased me in a decade. So,
Amazing.
but you know what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
there's a way that what was on my list, and I just had to have that conversation with him but most people don't know what's on their list.
Right.
They don't know what their standards are. They don't know what it is that they really, really need. They think what they don't want, right? I don't want to be
Mhm.
abandoned. I don't want to
All
be
the time.
rejected. I don't want to be teased. I don't like when you leave your sock on the floor, I think you think I'm your maid, which means that you don't respect me. We also give definitions to things. We give meaning to things that have
Right.
no meaning. Trust
Right.
me. I've never had I work with mostly men at this point. Like I work a lot, maybe not like 60-40 with men.
Mhm.
And I will tell you that not one of them has ever said to me, "I left my sock on the floor to piss off my wife." They are trying to please their partner so much. I can't even tell you how
Totally.
much they just want like a happy partner.
Right.
So, and there's passive aggressive stuff and there's narcissists. I get it. But in
Right.
general, men
Yeah.
are not, and again, in a heterosexual relationship, are not trying to piss
Mhm.
us off. So this meaning we give things is problem number one, obviously. But there's a
Mhm.
way that we start to think that he doesn't but really what you're looking for, right, is that I want to feel appreciated. But even that, what does that mean? Like,
Right.
what will that have you feel? Because
Mhm.
if you're just looking, I talked to a client the other day. She said, "Well, he never compliments me." But this was all related to her insecurities,
Right.
getting older. And I was like, that's not, he, and then I would say to her, he never, well, when he does, but I don't know how, if he means it.
Right.
Or he's just saying it to be nice. I'm like, this guy can't win. Like, are you
Right.
kidding me? Like, what?
Mhm.
But that's the thing. And I said to her, but let's go back. Like, what is it that you're not? And sure enough, as we were talking, she really started to be able to identify wanting this feeling. I think most of us is what we want. We
Mhm.
want to exhale.
Mhm.
We want to walk in the door of our home and go, made it.
Mhm.
Made it. This is my safe place. This is where the people love me. They cherish me. It feels so good. And I said to her, well, what would it feel like to feel cherished? What would it feel like to exhale? What would you be doing? What would you be saying? We start, and that's what people have to identify.
Yeah.
Not like, I don't like that he has a pretty young coworker and I don't like that he talks to her. It's
Mhm.
like, what? Like,
Right.
what? So what aren't you getting? Like, and again, what do you
Mm.
need? Because, you know, I could,
Right.
I walk up on women flirting. Gary, my hubby's very attractive. I walk on women flirting with him all the time. And I laugh because he just has eyes for me. Like, there's so not any energy there at all. And
Right.
he's very friendly, very nice to them.
Right.
But you can tell there's not,
Mhm.
I mean, and if you look,
Right.
and I would say that that happens a lot, but if you're looking, he
Mhm.
doesn't have my back, but I feel supported. I feel
Right.
like he has my back. These things I need, I feel like are there. So when
Mhm.
the other stuff comes up, I'm not saying I never get annoyed with the whiskers in the sink. Don't get me wrong. Quite a moment. But in general, we all have
Yeah.
moments, but in
Right.
general, I rinse it. Like he
Mhm.
tried to
Right.
rinse it,
But not to
but
not to your
not to
standard.
my standard.
Right.
Right. And
Well,
so I remember that I'm rinsing it because that's for me, not
for
him.
you.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay, so there's so many things. So like I think what I'm hearing is like you need to know what your standards are, but what people focus more on are expectations.
Yep.
And the expectations are not, first of all, they're not expressed. And then you're expecting someone to behave a certain way so you can feel better. So that's actually
Yep.
more manipulative than anything.
Yes.
But I think, to your point about like the compliment, it's like the needs really come down to like, are you complimenting yourself? Because even if he says the words like, you look so beautiful, you're aging so gracefully,
Yep.
if you are not doing that yourself,
Yep.
it doesn't matter. You're not going to hear it because of that lens. And I'm finding that more and more, like I'm learning, doing this like deep subconscious work of like, it doesn't matter what's happening out here. Like if I don't believe that I, am accepted or connected, whatever is happening here, it's going to be filtered through that negative thought pattern, which
Yep.
then like triggers an unmet need. And so I'm finding more and more whenever I get emotionally triggered, and I've learned having a child is the most triggering thing in the world. Like, oh my
Uh-huh.
God.
Uh-huh.
Like, woo, we got buckle up. I was like, all right. My daughter just turned 2 in February, and I am learning more about myself in these
Love
past
it.
couple months than I have in my whole existence. But I find like when I'm emotionally triggered, like there's an unmet need that I'm responsible for, like whether that is time for myself, space, whether that's connection. I'm like, that's all my personal responsibility. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely like
Mhm.
hard, and it feels really uncomfortable because we're so used to looking at other people till they make me feel
Yep.
better, like do the thing so I can feel better.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's like you have to know and you have to define it. If you can't define it and you don't have the language, it's just gonna continue to perpetuate. And that
Yep.
sounds like why couples are literally having the same like
Yes.
argument and about different things over
Yep.
and over and over again.
Yep. And while you'll have a divorce-worthy conversation because the pillows weren't on the bed correctly,
Right.
or
Yeah, they get there.
there's peanut butter in the jelly
Right.
because you put your knife through it. Oh, and literally people are like having knockdown dragouts about, and if
Mhm.
anybody thinks of their last argument, it was something pretty small. They
Always.
just are. So I say all the time that you have to have high standards and
Mhm.
low expectations.
Totally. That
But
like
most people have high expectations and
and they
low
don't know, and
standards.
low standards because they don't know what their standards
Yes.
are.
Yes.
And I
That's
think to
what
your point about like the whiskers in the sink, it's like if you, he attempts, like, I think about this with the bed. It's so funny how my husband makes the bed. I'm like, all right. But at the same time, I'm like, I want it to look a certain way because I like the way that it makes me
Right.
feel when I get in it. I'm not gonna yell at him and be like, what is this? Like, it doesn't matter. But like,
Yeah.
having that standard of what you need and what's important to you, and then you taking care of it yourself, I think really
Yes.
is what makes relationships
Right.
like get through the hard times. Because if relationships are not, they're not always going to be these like walk in the park, they're highs and lows, and it's not
A lot of them.
being a human is challenging.
And I
So
would even
yeah,
say if I was having so much trouble with the whiskers in the sink, I would hire someone to clean the sink every day
right, right.
or
Like
whatever. I don't
if we're
You
gonna get
know,
to
I
that
I
point,
had
right,
someone who was complaining about the socks on the floor. I was like, "Stop buying them socks. I don't know,
right,
get them some sandals." Like, I don't know what to like, at some point, you
right,
have to really go, what's really upsetting me?
right.
But what happens is because you're not getting what you need,
Mm-hmm.
you're focused on what you want. I want you
Right.
to put things away. I want you to care when you clean
Mm-hmm.
out the sink. I want you to wipe. I can't tell you how many things I've had about wiping down the counters correctly. Don't get me started. Like, there's a little jelly on it, or you didn't wipe it down, or the pots that are left to soak. I mean, it's just, or
Yeah.
their pots were clean, but not correctly. There's stuff on them. It's, I get that there's weaponized incompetence, and I'm not talking about that right now because
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole, and even that, I would say, yeah, then hire somebody to what, like, take
Mm-hmm.
some things out of the mix
Yeah.
that are this way. But again, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to get back to that. Got to get
Yeah.
back to what your particular deal breakers are. Everyone's a little different. What
Mm-hmm.
they need to feel cherished every moment. They need whatever. I don't care what you need. You just have to know what it is and then realize that how does it truly show up?
Mm-hmm.
It's not, well, I need appreciation, so he needs to say thank you after every meal. It's like maybe, but what else feels, how do you really feel appreciate, there's usually something else.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk to him that he puts his phone down, I have full attention. That's appreciation. And if you're focused on the the sock, so he goes, "Oh my god, there's 800 things I have to think about,"
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just this one thing, really.
Yeah.
Like full attention every time she talks. That's all I gotta do. Whenever she talks to me, I gotta put down whatever I'm doing. I have to turn away from the TV. I have, and again, pick your times to talk.
Right.
But beyond that, like, and that's a biggie in my house. I
Mm-hmm.
I, I need full attention. Like, just give me your full attention for a moment. That's all
Mm-hmm.
we have to do here. You know.
Yeah.
So, but you gotta get to that, or you're gonna be focused on too many things, and nobody can, and you can't even. You're gonna always be sad and upset because who could keep 50 things perfect?
Totally. And the other person's trying to like figure out how to like keep themselves feeling good
Yes.
and happy. So it's like that's a lot. It's a lot of responsibility to put to outsource to
Yes.
someone else in those
Yes.
times.
Yes.
So, okay, so you've mentioned the like minute, like essentially like kind of like stress reduction in a way of like take the things off the plate that are
Mhm.
stressful, that are adding weight, that are making it crack. And then understanding what your needs are and understanding your standards and having low expectations. So what
Yep.
else do you do with clients that come in? And do they come in as a couple or is it just one person?
Usually one. I get
Yeah.
one a lot. I do have some couples I work with still, but I have to tell you, it's so interesting. I feel like I do better work with one
Yeah.
because
I say it
when
only
you come,
takes one person to have a good
right?
relationship.
It does. Because when you come in together, there's a lot of the finger pointing and the
Right.
arguing. And when you just get that you've co-created this relationship, which means that you have 100% responsibility,
Mhm.
not 150, that's codependence.
Right.
Just 100.
Just 100.
Just
That's
100.
enough.
You don't have to look at their 100. You don't have to worry about their 100. You just worry about your 100. When people truly do that, things really change. And there's another piece of science I want to say, because this is important towards this.
Mhm.
This is the work of Timothy Wilson, and I quote it all the time because it's brilliant. Your conscious brain processes information at a rate of 40 bits per second, while your subconscious or unconscious brain processes information at a rate of 11 million bits per second. So your partner doesn't, or other people don't hear what you say, they hear what you mean.
Mhm.
So the biggest thing you can do is get in an alignment of love, not fear.
Mhm.
Is to, and we can talk about how to do that, but
Yeah.
let's just say, but to do that, because what I get a lot, so I'll give someone a great tool. They'll go home, they'll use the tool, right? They're like, "Oh, this sounds great." They're all motivated, right? After they talk
Mhm.
to me and you and whoever,
Mhm.
right? And everyone listening knows how this feels, right?
Mhm. You're like,
And then
inspiration.
you're doing it for a few days and you're like, that little voice, our problems have really been going on a long time. This little tool is not going to really help.
Mhm.
I'm not seeing any changes. I am so tired of dragging this relationship along. It's going to take more than just some little thing to, or we've been going on for years this way. Nothing, tigers don't change their spots, whatever. Like, and I call that the wobble.
Mhm.
So now my subconscious and now even my conscious, right, but a lot of times you don't even know you're thinking it. You don't
No.
even realize you're thinking it. It's just that subconscious tape going on.
Right.
So now I'm doing like, let's say setting intention. I talk about that a lot, set intention for like connection, joy, ease, right, with your partner. So they do it, but because they're keeping score,
Mhm.
they're watching and waiting. And now the partner, remember, is picking up on the 11 million bits. It doesn't matter about your 40 and you're
Mm-mm.
going, hey, baby, I love you. And, mwah, and it's
Right.
great. And blah, because the wobble is there. So the
Mhm.
partner feels it. It just
Right.
feels off. It's like
Mhm.
if you're walking down the street and someone's coming towards you and you're like, I'm going to cross the street. They didn't say
Mhm.
anything to you, but you just know. Same thing. Same thing. So your partner goes, I'm going to wait. I don't know what this is. She's nice now, but I'm going to wait and see.
Mhm.
Okay. So now I'm doing this tool, Abby's great tool for another week, and he's not changing. So I'm like, this doesn't work.
Mhm.
And they come back to me and say that didn't work. I'm like, oh, no, no, it does work 100% of the time, but not when you are keeping score,
Right.
asking me, how long do I have to do this?
Mhm.
Right. How long do I have to do it before I accept? If you have that in your head, forget it
It's not gonna work.
because you are keeping score. You are not just being aligned in the fullness of that. And again, the fear is this person's going to take advantage of me. And
Mhm.
I am here to tell you, I want to say 100% of the time, but I won't. I'll say 98% of the time. It never happens. The opposite happens
Mhm.
every time. I really want to say every time because I've never had in 40 years of doing this, other than again, a true narcissist or a true, you know,
Mhm.
really deep mental health issue, which
Mhm.
most people don't have.
Mhm.
People react to that to that love, to all those good, yummy things because it's what we all want. We
That's
all
what we
wanna
want.
connect.
It's
We all
right.
want connect. We all
Like,
want love.
it's a basic
So,
need that we
it's a
have as
basic
human
friggin' need.
beings.
So guess what happens? That little subconscious of theirs aligns with the conscious, and they're like, "Oh my god, this is really different. This feels so good," because their
Mhm.
own fear stops taking over, and you're
Mm.
just there. You're just doing it no matter what. And you know what's interesting for anyone who does have kids? We do this with our kids easily. We
Mhm.
do. Our kids yell and scream and throw tantrums or whatever they do, and we don't go, "Oh, you little jerk." Like, "Oh, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Go, ugh, I don't ever wanna talk
Mhm.
to you again.
Mhm.
Act
It's
your
like
age,"
you
right?
left your sock on the ground.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like
We have so much patience, and then what I hear,
Mhm.
though, from people, they're like, "Well, he's a grown man. He's a grown ass man," I'm like, "I get it," or a grown ass woman,
Mhm.
I get it. But why should anybody be treated with less compassion and love and
Mhm.
kindness, especially the person that you've like pledged your life to in some way, oh my God, or your brother, whoever, that you have a
Mhm.
long-term relationship with. And there are ways, again, it's about you having boundaries and trusting yourself. It has nothing to do with the other person taking advantage of you. It has
Mhm.
to do with you trusting yourself,
Mhm.
trusting your boundaries that you'll know. I promise, I guarantee you will know when it's really not working. When
Mhm.
you've given your all and put it all in, and it's like, this is just not, and then you get to a place of, wow, we're just not a good match.
Mhm.
It's a very different thing than he's a jerk and I feel rejected and abandoned.
Right.
It's
It makes
so
the
different.
decision of, like, what's next so much
Oh,
easier than and not, like, toxic or,
yep,
it can be so painful. But I'm curious, like, how that works when someone on one end thinks that they have put in all of the work and all the
yeah,
effort and the other person isn't
yeah,
trying.
I know. And that's everybody who comes to me, I think.
Yeah.
And I say to them, like, so again, like your boundaries. So who do you
Mhm.
just want to be in the world?
Yeah.
So here's the deal with boundaries and what people don't get. Your boundary should never change based on how another person reacts to you.
Mhm.
So if my boundary is that I'm a kind, compassionate person, It does not matter if someone is not kind and compassionate to me.
Right. You stay in
I'm
that
kind and
lane.
compassionate. I'm not a doormat.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm codependent. See, again, don't people get into the unhealthy levels? And I'm like, that's
Mhm.
not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that I'm kind and compassion sometimes is, you know, you know what? I don't allow people to speak to me this way. So I'm gonna leave the room. And we'll have to check in later and try again.
Mhm.
That's very compassionate and kind.
Yeah.
Resentment and feeling resentment and anger to the
Right, it's
person
like the
is not
exact
kind.
opposite.
Which is what we usually do. We collapse our boundaries. We're like, "Oh, he's being nice. I'll let it go," or "We're getting along. I don't wanna rock the boat," or any of that stuff, and then we're just full of resentment and seething and calling them a jerk, and I don't think that's very nice.
Mhm.
But
Right.
that's
This
the
is
idea.
yeah. So, I mean, you do talk about boundaries a lot and in this
I
work. And
do.
is boundaries, it's like, yeah, I feel like you can't have a discussion about relationships without the discussion of boundaries. And I'm curious about what you said about aligning, back in love and like out of alignment with fear. Is
Mhm.
boundaries a piece of that?
Yes, because it's really your boundaries with yourself.
Mm,
And I always want people to like, think about this, I remember when I was getting clean, there was I'll do it quickly, but I was in a situation, I was living overseas at the time, and I was in a situation, I had about a year off heroin, and I was kinda dying, and I was in a situation where I was away, I was on a school thing, and I was away, and I thought, "Oh, I could use drugs here, like, no one will know." Do you know what I
mhm,
mean? Because I can just go
mhm,
back in,
totally.
no one knows. And, because I had outed myself to people that I was in recovery. And it was at that it's so thank God, in that moment, I thought, "But I'll know.
Mm,
Like, why am I the one it matters the least to know
right.
about my commitment to myself?" And
Mhm,
so every time you say, "I'm gonna go on this diet," or "I'm gonna start working out," or "I'm going to" I don't care what it is, or "I'm gonna not let my child, run me. I'm
mhm,
gonna start having every time you do that and don't follow through, your word means nothing. And
mm,
that is why you're so upset at other people because you're expecting them to hold the boundary and it's not their job, it's yours.
mm,
100% yours. It's not even a little bit theirs. It's
mhm,
100% yours. Otherwise, you're just a victim.
right,
Like other people get to control no, they
right.
don't. But so if you want to have a life filled with connection, joy, and ease, you have to have boundaries with yourself. So
Mm.
one of the first things I say to people is stop making so many commitments to yourself. It's
Mhm,
okay. You don't have to.
mhm.
Why not just start Tuesday afternoon? It's always Monday, right? Or the 1st of the month or the
Mhm.
whatever.
Right.
Just here it is Tuesday afternoon. What if the rest of the night I don't eat sugar? Or if I don't think I can do that and I still wanna have Haagen-Dazs later, maybe I talk about ice cream a lot, yes. Maybe I can tell what I like. Maybe I'll what if could I have a scoop later instead of 5 scoops? Could I have 2 scoops instead of 3?
Mhm,
Like, is that okay with me? Could I do that for myself and just enjoy it? Could I have it and sit in the not hide it and, like, sit in the living room and enjoy it? Can I I don't know,
mhm.
but if when we start talking to ourselves in a different way and we stop with these draconian, "What, you're never gonna have a cookie again? Give me a break,"
Right.
like, "Really? Is that what we're setting up?" You know,
Mm,
if we can have a little more ease and love there and, again, start to keep our word, however small, "I'm gonna
right.
shower. I'm gonna whatever," and do
Mm,
it. You
mhm,
know, these are the ways we start to build up the trust with ourselves, and
mhm.
that is the only way we could ever trust another person.
Mm,
I mean, think about it. If you don't even trust
totally.
yourself,
Right.
it's
It'd be
impossible.
impossible.
Right.
Right. And
And
people
without
look to other people to determine
yep.
that for them.
Yes.
Oh,
It's
it's
not good.
so good, Abby.
Not
Wait.
good.
So, so if like someone's listening, because we boundaries is a hot topic,
Yeah.
buzzword. We talk about it a lot.
Mhm.
And this way of the way that you're describing it, it makes so much sense of like boundaries with it yourself and like knowing what they are and then following through with
Right.
them and having that trust.
Mhm.
Because yeah, I mean, this is like so common in all of us, myself included, of like breaking those commitments to ourselves and then going into this like shame spiral for not keeping those commitments. And
Yep.
then again, that like that
Oh,
disconnect creates a disconnect with the people around you. Because
yep.
you're like, well, if I can't trust myself, how could I trust these
Yeah.
people, how could they trust me? And they kind of like, spirals from there. So where does someone start? Someone's listening and they're
Mhm.
like,
Yep.
wow, I've never thought about boundaries that way. And I can't it makes so much sense why I
Mhm.
have such a hard time setting a boundary with a person because I can't even set a boundary within myself. Where does someone start there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I do have a book called Boundaries Made Easy that just came out late
Amazing.
last year. You can buy that, have it all there. The second thing you can do is go to my website, abbymedcalf.com, which I'm sure you'll link to in the show notes, and
Yes.
just put in the word boundaries. You will have so much free information. So I'm all about, like, you can spend money if you want, but you don't need to. If you don't have a
Hmm.
dollar,
Yeah.
you can get
This.
everything you need.
Yeah.
I always write the books as a means of bringing everything together so it's simple and you could just follow the instructions. But if
Right.
you feel like you can do it yourself, party on. I'm here to
Hmm.
help people. So however that happens. For now, though, I'll say to you is your first things first is that you have to make a commitment to a boundary. First of all, saying what you feel or like is not a boundary. I don't like how you said that to me. Don't talk to me that way. I feel
Hmm.
really uncomfortable with what you just said. None of those are boundaries.
Mm-mm.
None of those. Because people say, "Oh, and then he trampled it. I told him I don't like it, and then she trampled it."
And
It's
you
like,
can't,
you
that's
didn't
an expectation. You
that
can't
yeah, yeah,
expect
you
them
just
to.
sort of said stuff, you know?
Right.
So a boundary always has what I call, like, teeth. It has a response, not a consequence. You're not punishing anyone, but it
Mhm.
has a response that you'll have if it's not held, right? So you will hang up the phone, leave the room, ask again, whatever. You should
Mhm.
never repeat a boundary ever.
Mhm.
That's a big mistake people make because they repeat it over and over and over, and it's like, "No, no, no, one time and then the teeth," and then
Mhm.
you take an action. But the biggie there is that about a true boundary is that you stop taking responsibility for anyone else's thoughts, feelings, or actions, and you take full 100% responsibility for your own thoughts, feelings, and actions. That's a boundary. That's where boundaries live. That's how they start. That's what it is. And I always say, boundaries are love. Boundaries are to
Mhm.
you make a boundary because you're trying to keep people in. You're
Right.
trying to still have a relationship with my narcissistic mom. I wanted to
Mhm.
still have a relationship with her. How can I draw boundaries so we can still I want this relationship, right? I was trying
Mhm.
to keep her in. Walls are meant to keep people out.
Mhm.
So a wall, cutting people off, and I'm not saying you can
Right.
never cut people off, but I would like you to try to practice the skill of boundaries first, because when we cut people off and we unfollow and we block them and I'm never talking to them again, I'm making a pronouncement that I hate you and I never want to speak to you again. That's all, I guess, okay if you have to. But I would love, and again, in a truly toxic situation, I get it. But in most situations, what's happening is you don't trust yourself to hold the
Mhm.
boundary. So you
Mhm.
make this huge pronouncement, which by the way, most of the time you can't keep. You're going to see your brother again at Thanksgiving. Are you never going to see your brother again at a family function? Like it's going to happen. So
Mhm.
you have to figure out another way to do that, which is to be able to have identify your deal breakers, make standards from those, and then have teeth that are applied, a response that's applied to whatever the standard is when it's not met.
Mhm.
And it's all on you. It's
Right.
all on you, and you don't always have to pronounce it or anything else. But that's that first piece. And so that's why I often start with people. I'm like, just try to have a boundary with yourself for a little bit.
Yeah.
Try to see what that is. And again, what is your response if you don't hold the boundary?
Mhm.
So not mean, attacking, self-flagellation, I'm a
Mhm.
piece of shit, whatever. But
Mhm.
instead, like, what else could your response be? Could you have a loving response to not holding
Mhm.
with yourself? Could you think, "Oh, that" what I always think, clients will come to me, I always send homework, and they'll say, "Oh my god, I didn't do the homework. I'm so sorry."
All the
And I always
time.
say to them, "That's actually on me, not you. I clearly sent too much. I wasn't aware." Do you know what I mean? Of where
Mhm.
you were. Somehow I thought you were somewhere that you weren't.
Mhm.
That's just a way I didn't align with you on that.
Mhm.
They never think it's me. They
Mm-mm.
always think it's them.
Mhm.
Like, I'm a screw up, or I don't do homework, or I don't follow through, and I'm like, "No, no, no." Like, to me, that just means I haven't met you where you are yet.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, let's talk about that. Then we try to problem solve. Would
Mhm.
would you rather read something versus listen to an episode of my podcast? We start to problem solve. Would you rather have nothing and we just do it here? You don't have to have homework. Like, how can we talk and how can you tell me what your needs are,
Mhm.
right? But we don't usually know our needs. We don't think to say them out loud, God forbid. And then when we do, we don't again have teeth or something on the other side. That's like if I kept giving homework to a client, no matter or shaming them for not doing it, I would
Mhm.
hope they would fire me.
Mhm.
Like, that should be the teeth of that. Like, wow, we are just not a good fit.
Mhm.
Like, with love, like, "Hey, we're not a good fit. This doesn't seem like what I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna explore other options." Okay,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't also have to be an F you and I hate her and a bad whatever review and, like, you can just move along.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I think all of that, it's like so interesting to see how like the conversation started with like the relationships and two people and how it evolved into really it comes down to the relationship with self and how that goes into all relationships, not just with a partner, with
Yes.
clients, with colleagues, with friends, with random people on the internet. Like it is
Yes.
like all
Yes.
comes down to
Mhm.
yourself. And
Yes.
it's so beautiful that like really I feel like that foundational piece is the boundary with yourself. And I love that approach of like, okay, if you can't follow through with these commitments, like just start with a simple boundary and like know what the teeth is and
Yep.
know what that consequence is. And then that's it. Like
That's it.
that's it. And
That's
then
it.
you just move on. And so you're saying like the consequence or the teeth can be as simple as can you meet yourself with compassion? So if that doesn't happen, instead of beating yourself up,
Yep.
have compassion for yourself the way that
Yes.
you would with someone else. I'm like, oh, it's okay. It's
Right?
okay that that happened
Yeah.
versus like, or, meeting yourself with that like curiosity of like, well, why didn't it happen? And maybe that's the teeth. Maybe that's what it is.
That's
It's
what
like,
I
can
love.
you be
Yeah.
curious about why? You said 2 minutes ago that you weren't going to go check Instagram. And then next thing you know, you're doom scrolling.
Right.
And so you're like, instead of being like, what's
Huh.
wrong with you? Which is, I think, the automatic response
Yep.
for so many of us
Yep.
that like, well, let's be curious instead. The judgment hasn't quite worked out because we're still doing the same pattern. So let's look at what's
Yep.
going on over here.
Love it.
And
It's
so,
the it's that negative voice, "Why did I do that?"
right.
And I always say it's, "Huh, what? Hey, why did I
Why?
do that?"
Yeah, like that, just like the
Just
tone. It's like the
yes.
delivery because that voice. Like I always joke, 'cause, like I can hear my mom's voice when
Oh,
I
yeah.
like mess up. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, like, and then just being like, well, that's not my voice. Like, let me like my voice when I hear my voice to my daughter is so different. And then now she mimics it. Like, it's so funny the way she goes, what's up, mama? Like the way, and I'm like, that is me. That is my
Yep.
voice. Like
Here
just
we
the
are.
tone, the affliction, all of it. And I'm like, God, it's so kind when it's coming from your voice. Like when she goes, good job, mama. Like she'll say, good job.
Oh,
I'm like, I could do that for myself, but it's like that tiny shift makes such a big difference.
it
And
really does.
I just love this conversation, Abby.
Yep.
This is so great. I can't wait
Yep.
to listen to all your podcast
I
episodes because this is so juicy
and
and time
I
just
do
flew by.
I do so much of it too, and I just wanna say, as a last thing on I just changed it on my website. It's funny. There's a line at the top. It says, "Be with someone who makes you happy," and then I crossed out the with.
I love that.
Just be someone who makes you happy.
Someone to make you
That's
be that person.
be the person,
I love
and then
that.
think of what you're going to attract from that space. And even think of how it's not fear-based anymore because you
Right.
feel replete, you feel full, you feel like there is nothing missing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what can I bring in from there, from
Yeah.
that space? Oh,
Which
beautiful.
is like when you think about it, it's like so like this is, we think of abundance and scarcity. It's like so wild how scarcity is
Yep,
just so
yep,
embedded and rooted in our
yep.
culture and our programming and everything. And so it just shows up in every, people just associate it with money. And I'm like, no, it
No.
is like that's like one small piece of it. It is like
Yep,
rooted in so many other things. But like that shift from fear into love is that lack
yep.
into abundance, which opens up such a
Oh,
different world. Oh my gosh, this is such a great conversation. I just loved it. I feel like I need
me
like
too.
to have, I'm going to read your book and then have you back on the show to
Right?
talk about your book
Yay.
because I love doing that. I definitely am going to read Boundaries
Woo.
Made Easy. Um, it's so good. I think, there's so much juiciness from this conversation that people can apply whether they're in a relationship or not, because it really
Yep,
comes down to having this relationship with yourself. So
yep.
is there anything else that you want to share? I'll definitely link the books
Great.
in the show notes, your podcast, Instagram, all that jazz. But is there anything else you
Great.
want to share before
No,
we wrap
I
up?
mean, I really just I want everyone to walk away thinking that there's one thing you could do today, or better yet, no, not even do, because we're such doers. One thing you could think differently today.
Hmm.
Like, what's one thing I could think different? Because you feel the way you think. So if you just
Hmm.
changed one thought, then you could really change how you feel today. So
Yeah.
just that.
Yeah, like, so simple because it's really like, "Oh, it's possible. Oh, I
Right.
can have a good relationship. Oh, it
Right.
really only takes
Yes.
me to make this work." And those are the thoughts that make the change. And
Yep.
now it's just a matter of, like, continuing to
Right.
consciously choose to think that.
Yes. Choose
Mm,
to think it. So really, anytime
yeah,
you think, what should I be doing? Because, we always have that long to-do list.
right.
Think instead, what could I be thinking?
Mhm.
So get rid of the doing and go to what could I be thinking?
Totally. Because
That's
the
the way.
thinking leads to the feeling, which eventually will lead to the doing. But
To the
I
actions.
couldn't agree more. So good. So if I was to ask your friends and family, your children, anyone that knows you, what your superpower is, what would they say?
Uh, it's the ability to probably connect with food. My superpower is, like, food.
I
That's my
love that.
superpower.
I
I
love
love
that.
food. I love talking about food. I love making food. I love feeding the people I love. I love eating it. I love talking about it. But it's, like, such a beautiful means of bringing people together. So
Yeah.
it's just my favorite thing.
Well, it makes sense because connection
Yeah.
right there. Oh,
Yep.
I love that. That's such a good answer. That might be my favorite answer that I've had
Right.
on this
My
show.
superpower is
My
food.
superpower is food. It's so good. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your wisdom and your sense of humor and everything that you brought to the show. So much fun. This is just a taste for what your podcast is like. So,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your gifts and thank you for following the breadcrumbs into this world because this like really is very deeply important work. And if more people focus on this, it would definitely make a huge difference in our world. Like the positive ripple that it creates is tenfold. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you for having me.